much appreciated. And thank you, Adrian, for inviting me. It's a pleasure. Can I share my screen, Adrian?
Sure.
So, I think you need to stop sharing yours. Yeah.
I think it's fine. It should be fine now. Is it okay?
That's right. Cool. 1 second. Can you see my screen?
Let me check. Yes.
Okay, awesome. All right. So yeah, just I'll start off a little bit telling you guys about myself and the businesses that I run, and then I'll kind of get into more about prioritization and how to actually get things done a little bit at scale. So yeah, I'm Italian British. I spent my childhood in Italy, and then I actually studied in the UK in London. I came to Cambodia when I was 22 in 2013. So I've been here 7 years. And actually, a kind of little known fact about me, I actually dropped out of university to come to Cambodia. I came here for around a month. My brother was already here, doing some business, and I really, really liked it. And I decided to stay, and I didn't come back and finish my kind of last 6 months at university. Of course, my mum was kind of like crazy angry about that, but actually I think it kind of really, really turned out well. I think I really like Cambodia. I think I like the people a lot, and also the kind of positive vibe that people here are kind of constantly starting new things and trying new things. So I think that's quite a difference in some ways to the kind of mindset in Europe. Yeah, before we get into everything, I'd like to just ask a question, and what does it mean to be efficient, right? Is it the amount of things you get done in a particular time frame? Like, oh, okay, I completed 40 to-dos last week, right? Or is it the outcomes and results that you achieve, regardless of any kind of effort that you put into that? Or is it having a good work-life balance? So does that mean you finish work at 5 p.m. every day and that your weekends are free? I'm not going to give you the answer to this today, because I think every single person needs to work that out for themselves. But I think that's something to keep in mind as you look to find strategies to become more efficient. You need to also define what efficiency means for you. Right, so I'm involved in 3 companies in Cambodia, either as a shareholder or as a CEO and founder. The first one is Sound School, which you may have seen is a music school and music shop. So we have 2 schools in Phnom Penh and 1 in Siem Reap. So we teach both children, adults musical instruments, and then we also sell musical instruments as well. And also we have the piano shop in BK1 that kind of sells grand pianos. The second company is called MAD, which is it's a kind of design agency and creative consultancy. So we design and build products and services for companies. Products like, for instance, maybe some of you guys use PiPay. So that was actually built, the original one was built by MAD on behalf of PiPay. And we work with a lot of companies like Chipmunk Group, Canadian Bank, Batanet Bank, RMA Group. So generally we work with large companies, but also smaller startups that then aim to become larger in the future. And finally, we have Blue, which is it's a software startup. It's much smaller than the other 2. It's much younger, which the aim is to help people basically work better together. And the way we do that, we build software. So basically it's an online platform and also available as a mobile app that basically allows you to manage your projects with your team and allows you to see what's kind of coming next in your work. So it's kind of a way to stay organized. Yeah, this is Sound School. So on the top left, that's basically the one of the locations in Phnom Penh, and then in Russian Market. And then we also have the location at the bottom right in Siem Reap, and then the head office in BKK1. Now, the cool thing about this company is that I don't have the exact statistics, but I think it's around 80 or 85% women. So, and the head office is 100% run by women. So it kind of goes to show, and also everyone's quite young, mostly in their 20s or kind of early 30s, which kind of goes to show that I think if you give opportunities to young people, especially to women, then they can kind of rise up to the challenge and actually build something pretty cool. This is MAD. So you can see the team on the top left here running a workshop. And then in the middle there, working with one of our customers to actually create a product, and also some kind of brainstorming sessions. And also on the bottom left, one of our kind of female engineers actually is writing some code. And I think especially on engineering side, like coding apps and that kind of stuff, can be quite tricky to find women that are interested in these roles, and so it's kind of underrepresented sometimes. So we try and make an effort to actually go out and recruit women for these roles. Yeah, and then this is Blue. So again, we share the office with MAD. It's a couple of our kind of principles around long-term thinking and simplicity. And you can see one of our engineers. We have a Vespa in our office, which is kind of a 1960s blue Vespa. With that, so that gives you kind of an oversight of the kind of companies I run. Just quickly, if anybody has any questions on myself or on any of these businesses, feel free to ask.
So everyone, if you have any question, please feel free to share in the chat, and then we will read on your behalf, or you can also unmute yourself and ask your questions directly. And even if you have some questions that you want to start sharing in the chat during the presentation, feel free to, and then we will take the questions step by step.
Cool. Yeah, and so this morning I kind of took a tally of what I'm up to kind of right now, like this week, and to give you a kind of sense of scale overall. So in total, these businesses, they have around 75 people. My brother actually runs the sound school side of things, and I run MAD and Blue day to day. So I have right now 83 to-dos that I need to kind of get done at some point. Some of them are quite small things, might be like writing an email, might just take 10 minutes. And some things are kind of larger, maybe contracts and that kind of stuff that might take 3 or 4 hours, right? And overall, I'm part of 28 projects in MAD. Some of these are kind of customer projects, like maybe building a new app or designing a website or something like that. And then 11 internal projects at Blue. And this week, I kind of had a quick count. So I had approximately 30 meetings. That could be anything from sales to, to even this webinar, to one-to-ones with my staff, that kind of stuff. So one of the key problems, of course, when you're running a startup is that there's always too many things to do. So you can't get it all done in a reasonable time frame, right? And this is for a few reasons. First of all, startups, by their very nature, they lack resources, right? It's not Chipmunk Group or RMA Group or any kind of big company in Cambodia that basically they have kind of unlimited money and they just need to solve those problems, right? A startup is trying to solve a problem, but normally with very, very limited resources, both people, time, and money. The other thing is that you'll be working on things which either you're not good at or maybe you've not done before, right? So that's always going to be a bit more inefficient. So for instance, when you're starting out, you're going to be the CEO, you're going to be the kind of chief financial officer, the technology officer, you're going to be running marketing, you're going to be hiring people, and then when you have a team, you'll kind of need to help manage them, etc. And so if these things you haven't done before, again, you're going to be a little bit slower to do them than usual. And generally speaking, there's always going to be a lot of uncertainty in what you're doing with a startup, because if someone had already done exactly what you plan to do, then you probably wouldn't be doing it, right? The reason why you're starting a company is because you think there's a better way to do something that's available right now, or you want to create something completely new that doesn't even exist. So of course, there's going to be a lot of double guessing, and you're going to kind of wonder if you're doing the right thing at any time. Yeah, and then you're going to have a lot of different people to deal with. And I think there's a tendency for people who kind of are thinking of like leaving their job to start a company to think that, okay, well, I don't want to have a boss, right? So I'm going to start my own business. And I think once they do that, they quickly realize that actually, once you do run a company, in some ways you have far more responsibility to other people. So you have kind of lots of different bosses, right? So to give you a kind of short list of, obviously you might have investors, so people who actually have given you money in return for shares in your company to help you start. You might have a board of directors if your company gets large enough that you need to report to, a few times every year. You might have some set of advisors that you need to listen to and bring problems to. Obviously, you're going to have your customers. And I think it doesn't really matter what type of business you have. I think a business leader should always be close to customers, speaking with them, meeting with them, and understanding their problems and hearing their feedback. You may have business partners, maybe one, maybe several. So that's always the people that you're going to want to meet and deal with. Obviously, you're going to have suppliers. So you're going to, as a company, you will buy from other companies, either services or products that you need. So you need to keep good relations. Obviously, your staff as well, right? And as you grow, you may have more and more staff. Potentially press as well, if you need to get some PR out there. And last, but definitely not least, you've got your family and friends, which of course you can't just ignore because you're starting a company, right? So you still need to spend time with them, right? Yeah, so with that, there's some encouraging news, is that pretty much everything that's ever been achieved in humanity, so, think of sending people to space or, creating a new car or any kind of new innovation, everybody has done it with basically 168 hours a week, right? And that's for everything. So that's something that cannot be hacked or improved upon. So everybody works on the same time. So really it's about how you choose to use this time. When you're just starting out, normally it takes quite a lot of effort to get a business off the ground and running, even at a basic level. So you may want to spend maybe kind of half of your time working and then split rest between sleep and personal, right? And I think you should definitely inform people that you're starting something new and it's going to definitely take up a lot of your time. However, I think business is not a sprint; it's a marathon, because things are not meaningful. Things are not achieved in a few weeks or a couple of months. It's going to take years, right? Could be 3 years, could be 5 years, could even be 10 years, right? So with that in mind, I think you quickly, once you get things up running, you quickly want to reduce your kind of slightly relaxed work schedule, as I call it. So, you split, 30% of your time you sleep and work and personal is all in thirds, right? And I think that's a much more sustainable in the long term. I think there's been quite a few studies that say up to around 50 to 55 hours, that's the maximum that most people can work and stay effective. If you do more than that, you're then going to end up essentially with diminishing returns on the hours that you put in. Right, so with that in mind, so the best thing to do, of course, if you've got just set hours, 168 hours, is to build a time strategy. And this is what a whole bunch of different books and courses say to do. So you kind of count up your working time, right? Then you divide by all the people that you need to deal with and the things that you need to do. And then finally, that's pretty much it. You're now giving everyone the time they need, right? So that's kind of a simple calculation. So if you're kind of working your ass off and you're working, 80 hours a week plus, and you've got 25 different stakeholders, you'll be giving them kind of 3 and a bit hours each week. And logically, this seems like a great way to kind of split up your time in a fair way, right? The only problem with this is that it's actually a terrible idea. So very much like trying to give a bath to a cat is not something that you want to do as a business leader. The reason for that is that it ignores some key facts and realities about life, and especially about work, right? The first thing is that not all tasks are equally urgent, right? So if I have got something that I need to do, say a month from now, I'll probably start really thinking about it and doing it maybe a week beforehand, right? I'm not going to waste my time now doing something that is don't really have to think about for 1 or 2 or 3 months. Also, not all tasks have the same impact. There are things that might be incredibly urgent, but actually are very low value tasks, while there are things that maybe are not so urgent, but actually do have a much larger impact, right? Also, different stakeholders will have different levels of patience, right? So you can use that to your advantage. You can kind of strategically ignore certain people, especially if they're, you know, for instance, for staff, if they're already doing a really good job, then you don't need to spend too much time with them, and you focus on other areas, right? So yeah, I think if there's a key takeaway from today, I just want you to remember that basically not all tasks are equally important. And that's the kind of really the basic idea to start prioritizing between things, right? Right. So with this kind of problem in mind, right, that there's always going to be too many things to do, and then that not all tasks are equal. Does anybody have any suggestions on how we might go about solving that problem? I'll kind of open up the room, so to speak, if anyone.
You can share in the chat. Also, remember that if you would like to speak in Khmer, you can.
Yeah.
So feel free to unmute yourself. And if you don't want to, that's fine also.
Yes.
But maybe to kick things off in terms of the questions, I'll ask Manny, what's your thinking here? So if we've got too much time to do everything, and not all tasks are equal, how would you handle that?
I think I would think of it in terms of like what's more important in this moment to get done, like what can wait. So that's how I weigh whether the task is important or not important.
Yeah, that's right. And I think I just saw also somebody on the chat, Sinaf, saying that, yeah, there's also a good factor to, you know, you can have like an ignore list, you know, things of list that you're actually gonna ignore. So yeah, so I'll kind of I'll share a little bit my framework. Basically, I call the kind of lazy CEO strategy. I suffer hugely from kind of procrastination, which is kind of putting things off into the future. And so this is kind of my framework, which has helped me kind of deal with that over the years, especially as things have grown. And yeah, so basically, the first thing is don't confuse business with business, right? Because the reality is that of leadership is that if you try and tackle everything on your to-do list, you're going to end up working, you know, like 100 hours a week, right? And that's kind of impossible in the long term. So with that in mind, you need to find a framework of looking at things to ensure that you can choose the most important thing to work on. A nice analogy that I like to use is that imagine that you've got to water some plants in your garden, and you have your kind of water pipe or water hose, and the water is running very smoothly through the pipe, and you can easily water your garden in 20 minutes, right? And it's super easy. However, if the water flow is blocked and it just comes out very slowly for whatever reason, it's stupid to continue trying to water your garden, and it's going to take you an entire day to finish that. It's much better to stop, fix the problem of the pipe, make sure the water is flowing quickly, and then water your garden, right? And that key point is really at the heart of the lazy CEO strategy. And eventually, if you end up having a fair bit of spare time, then that's a sign that you're starting to kind of do things right. And another point is it's very easy to be productive by focusing on doing 10 really easy things. So that's something that you need to kind of focus away from and actually look at what actually matters, right? So yeah, the key question you need to be asking yourself constantly is like, what do I need to do next, right? And The answer to that is you need to focus on the most important thing, and that we call the point of constraint. So essentially what's stopping your company, your organization from moving forwards, right? In whatever way. It might be from delivering your product, it might be some issue with customers, anything, right? So you've got to identify that. And do not allocate your time fairly. So I think a lot of leaders fall into that trap of what we call kind of uniform time allocation, right? And they try and please everybody, because that's the agreeable thing to do. You keep everybody happy. The problem with that is that if you compare, say, a very hardworking CEO that tries to spread his time across everyone to a lazy CEO that will mostly focus on the key things, the lazy CEO, she's going to be spending like 50 to 80% of her time on the point of constraint, right? While the hardworking CEO, he's maybe only going to be spending like 5 or 10% of his time on that task. So if you compare that, it means that the lazy CEO who's really, really focused, kind of laser focused on the point of constraint, she's going to be removing key blocking points for her business like 5 to 10 times faster than someone who's working like 100 hours a week, right? So I think that's why you don't want to allocate your time fairly. And another point, this is something that should never be delegated. This is maybe the primary and most important thing that a business leader should do, is be focusing on the point of constraint. Yeah, in terms of actually tackling the point of constraint, there's a pretty easy strategy. Obviously, you've got to find what is a point of constraint in your business. Then you've got to fix that. And then you've got to give it to somebody else to manage and move on, and basically go and repeat the process and find the next point of constraint. Of course, that's easier said than done. So the key question then is, okay, how are we going to fix whatever is causing the problems in the business? How are we going to fix that point of constraint, right? And with that, there's basically going to be 5 hats I want to introduce you to. And when I talk about hats, I mean basically different ways of thinking, different frameworks to solve problems, right? The first one is what I call the learning hat. So that's basically about being curious and always wanting to learn about how things work and that side of things. And I think the nice thing about that is that if you do it well, it kind of energizes your entire organization. So it sets a great example. And I think in some ways, that's maybe one of the only key differences between companies. Because if you think about your startup and maybe another company, you got to hire the same talent pool, right? Say if you're in Phnom Penh, you've got access to the same people, you've got access to the same channels for advertising, Facebook or offline, even the same kind of marketing agencies, right? So I think the difference is how quickly is the organization learning happening in that company. The second point about being curious and always learning is that basically the expiry date for knowledge nowadays is becoming shorter and shorter. So maybe something that you learned 5 years ago is completely inapplicable now, and you have to relearn that. So I mean, I think a good example of how quickly things have changed is, smartphones have been around 12 years now, I think it is, 2008, I think the iPhone came out, and that's completely changed society. There's a whole bunch of new industries have started around that, and even unrelated industries have been completely changed, right? I mean, just in Phnom Penh alone, I think you can see that from things like banking, that everybody using ABA or PayPay or Wing through mobile apps, or even the simple act of getting a tuk-tuk now. Everybody's using Pass app or Grab, and that's changed many things, right? So the second hat is what I call the architect, and that's where you basically focus on strategy and where you want to get to in 5 years from now. So if you imagine that you were going to speak to 3 builders, and you ask the first one, what are you doing right now during your job? And he might reply, well, I'm doing a job, and that's to earn my salary so I can pay my rent and eat, which is fine. you ask maybe the second builder, okay, well, what are you doing in your job? And he says, oh, well, I'm building a wall, right? And so he's got a slightly bigger picture of what his job is about. Then you ask the third builder, well, what are you doing? And he replies, well, actually, I'm building a temple, right? So this guy actually sees the full picture. And I think that is kind of how we should aim to think when we're wearing the architect hat. So basically, it's trying to get that long-term picture, your company mission, your vision, and connecting that to what you're doing right now today and what your team is doing today. And so connecting that to the results that you want to see in 5 years' time. The key point here is that you can waste a huge amount of time on a bad strategy, right? And you can pretty much get nowhere, right? Or you can spend, less time and less effort on a really good strategy, and you can get awesome results without too much effort, right? So some specific examples about the architect hat in terms of business. I think a few things to consider in terms of the long-term picture is, the first is how to be different. So it's unlikely that you're going to have no competition, right? So you're always going to be having competition. So the key question is, how do you become different from them, right? Because a customer is going to look at your product or your service, and they're going to have to choose you, right? That's how it works. The other thing to consider is, ask yourself, what is not going to change in the long term? So it's tempting to always focus on new stuff like innovation or new products or new services. But I think it's also key to understand what are the stable factors in your industry. And then the nice thing about that is that you can keep investing on them, and you know that it's going to pay off in the long term. Because no one is going to wake up, your customers are not going to wake up in 10 years from now and wish, I wish your product was more difficult to use, or I wish your shipping took longer to get your product to my house, or I hope your product is more expensive, right? Of course not, right? They're going to expect something that's simpler. They're going to expect you to deliver faster, and they're going to want things at a lower price. And so you can invest in those things in the long term quite happily, because you know that it's going to pay off. The final point is, develop an offer they can't refuse. So essentially, wherever this is to investors or to your board or to your staff or to your clients, you want to give them an offer that essentially, when they look at it, they think, well, I would be stupid not to align myself with you, not to agree with you. Because, for instance, say a customer, you might offer a better product at a cheaper price, and of course they're going to go with you, right? So these are kind of things that you might want to think about when you're using your kind of architect hat. The next hat is the engineer hat. So in this, you're kind of thinking more about how your business runs. So, when we were wearing the architect hat, you were kind of asking more about what and the why of your business. Here, you're kind of asking really more about the how. So how are we actually going to go about doing business? I want to highlight an interesting statistic from the airline industry. So in 2017, so 3 years ago, there was not a single death in commercial jet travel that year, which is incredible when you think of the scale. So there were over 4 billion trips taken that year across around 40 million flights. So that's incredible. Not a single crash that hurt anybody, right? So how did they do that, right? And basically the answer is, they've got an obsessive focus, airlines, on procedures, on checklists, and on learning from failure. So basically every time something goes wrong, they study that, and then they build a checklist on how to make sure it doesn't happen again, right? In business, this is normally called an SOP, standard operating procedure. However, I don't really like that word so much, because it makes it sound like it has to be super official and really complex. It really doesn't have to be that. It can be it's just like a Google Doc with some bullet points, and you can even like print it out and put it on a wall or something. It can be really, really simple, but that's how you can kind of solve the kind of points of constraint using your kind of engineer hat. Next up is the hat of the coach, and there's an interesting split in terms of culture as well here. Some business leaders see their team and their company as a family, and others see it more like a sports team. Personally, I think both can work fine. I think looking at your team like a sort of extended family works best for either very, very small businesses or businesses that you don't expect are going to have much change over the next few years, right? And that's fine. However, if you're in a startup environment that you want the aim to grow your business quite quickly, then you're going to have to embrace a lot of change, right? Because as you grow, you're going to have to keep innovating, right? So I think it's much better in that case to then think of your team and your business as a professional sports team, and then you as the leader are basically a head coach. And so your key responsibilities are essentially you got to find the best talent and get them to join your team, and then you got to deal with people that are not performing, right? And the two ways of doing that is either coaching them to make sure that they can increase their performance, or asking them to leave and finding a new team member to join the team, right? Which is precisely what happens in kind of football teams, etc. The advantage, I would say one of the issues of a lot of startups is that they tell people that it's a family, but then they act like a startup. And so inevitably when the team does have to be changed, and people get laid off or they have to leave, then those individuals are going to feel really angry, really embarrassed, and quite rightly, they're going to feel kind of betrayed, right? However, if you're very upfront with your culture to say, well, actually, my team, is a high performance team, and this is how we're going to deal with people who don't perform. We're going to help them at first, and then either they get better, they improve their performance, or they leave. Then people are not going to feel so bitter if they are asked to leave, and they'll understand that it's also in their best interest to find a career elsewhere. And that said, I think business should be really, really fun, right? I mean, I go to work and I laugh with my team all day long, right? And I think that's awesome, right? We're going to spend a lot of time at work inevitably, so I think that's a key thing as well. The other thing is, I think with the kind of coaching hat, have regular one-to-ones with your team members. At a minimum, have it every quarter, so that's every 3 months. But ideally, you can even do it more than that. What you want to avoid is not meeting in these one-to-one meetings until only one time a year, and by then normally if there's any problems, they've already become so large that they're going to be very, very difficult to fix. And the other point is call out issues as they happen. Again, instead of waiting a month or 2 months, if one of your team members has a problem and there's like a bad performance or something, actually send them an email or just catch up for a couple of minutes. Even the next day, just go, oh hey, I saw what you did yesterday, and by the way, it's not this is what was wrong with it, and you're going to give them that kind of instant feedback. And it's a tricky thing to do, it's especially as you're starting out as a leader, but I think it's really important, because if you can get over the uncomfortable sensation of doing that, people, generally speaking, they appreciate it a lot. Also, one of my favorite questions with my kind of coach hat is, what are you reading right now? I like to hire people that like to read a lot, because it tells me a lot about them as well. And with that, normally when they tell me what they're reading, I'll then suggest some additional books that they can read. And the benefit of that is that it actually decreases the amount of work I've got on my plate, because if they are coaching themselves by reading good books, then that's kind of less coaching that I need to do to help them improve. And then the other hat is the player hat. So often a leader is a great individual performer, and this is normally why they've become a leader and why they've started a company, because they were good at what they were doing. So it's pretty natural to kind of occasionally jump in, kind of get your hands dirty and actually do some of the core work that the business requires, right? And I say it's a really, really great way to gain additional insight, and you develop empathy with your team who are actually doing the work every day, and actually you can work out what's wrong with how things are done, and then help that to be improved. Of course, also if there's an emergency, large workloads or absences, then sometimes you just need to do the work yourself as well. As mentioned earlier, startups normally lack resources, so you're often not going to have exactly the team you need. You're going to have a lot less people than you think you need to get things done, and so that's where you come in, right? That said, it's really easy to kind of overuse this technique, especially if you are covering for kind of underperforming team members. So I would say the priority normally would be to try and fix performance issues, not do all the work yourself to cover for the team. And I think that's really kind of important. So yeah, just to give a kind of quick summary of the overall approach. So essentially, there's always going to be too many things to do, right? So that's a given. The point of constraint is whatever is stopping the business from moving forwards as fast as possible. Leaders should almost exclusively be working at the point of constraint. You don't want to spread your time across everyone, right? Discover the key issues, those points of constraints, fix those issues in a permanent manner. You don't want the same problems over and over again, right? Then hand over that responsibility to somebody else. And then you repeat. And as a kind of leading thought in terms of this framework of a kind of lazy CEO framework, I think the whole thing does need to be underpinned by having fun in business. And I think that's in some ways the greatest productivity hack is if you go to work and you're doing something that you enjoy with a team that are also enjoying their work and people like each other, you're going to be doing a lot more than teams where it's only about the results and about, ticking check boxes, right? So I think that kind of environment is really, really important. So yeah, I think there's been quite a few key areas I've covered in this, and maybe I'd like to open the floor to kind of a Q&A on any of those aspects, and I can kind of go back and go a bit more in depth into things that anyone is particularly interested in.
I'm sorry to jump in. I see that there are some questions in the chat. So first of all, thank you very much for the presentation so far. I'm enjoying it a lot personally and learning a lot also. I will start with a question from Sinat. She's asking, could I know how is your company learning environment? Sinat, would you like to unmute yourself and maybe elaborate a bit more on your question?
Yes, thank you for allowing me to ask a question. Just want to know how you commitment to your employee, how you offer the learning approach to your staff. Like they can, like Zoom, they commitment to their staff by reimburse the book to their staff. It means that the staff can buy the book for themselves and their family, and then can reimburse money from the Zoom company. So I just want to know how your approach in your company for learning to your employee. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's a great question. So I think on the sound school side, so which is the music school, we actually teach some of the staff actually how to play the instruments, and they don't have to they don't have to pay for that. And that's because obviously if we want the head office staff and the staff at the shops to really be knowledgeable about music, then they have to learn how to play. In terms on the MAD and Blue, so yeah, in terms of the books, we actually have a very similar policy. We basically have, we use Blue to track our library in our office, and essentially anybody can request a book, and then normally once every 4 to 6 weeks, we will batch buy all those books, and then, you know, they'll either be bought locally or we'll get them shipped from Amazon. And then those are company property, but obviously everybody's welcome to you know, take one home and read it. So we've built, I think, probably close to 250 or 300 books in our library at MAD in that way. The other thing is we also spend time and money for workshops. So that's in the past, we've also bought English teachers for some of the Khmer staff that didn't speak English as well. And I think that's a key skill set in consulting. And also, yeah, any kind of online courses the company will pay for the employees. So that's kind of how we encourage people to constantly upskill themselves.
Thank you very much. And then we have another question from Sokip. She's asking if you can recommend a few books that you think would be worth reading.
Yeah, for sure. I think one really good book in terms of if you're starting out with business, I would say Start With Why by Simon Sinek, which basically gives a framework of in terms of how to communicate about your mission for your company. In terms of actual productivity, one book that's had a huge impact on me is a book called Deep Work by Cal Newport. And essentially, you know, the ability to lock yourself in a room and actually spend 3 or 4 hours focused only on one thing is becoming rarer and rarer, right? Because we're all so used to multitasking, and we've got our phones with us all day long with push notifications. So being able to develop, you know, the ability to basically do that deep work is really important in the modern economy. And this book gives a lot of tips and strategies on how to do that. Another great book along the same lines is one that I'm reading right now. It's called Indistractable, which basically is along the same lines of how to reduce distractions in your daily life so you can kind of accomplish the things that you want to accomplish.
Thank you so much. And maybe, Manny, if you don't mind, after the session, you can send us the references of these books, and we can also share the information in the Facebook group. For me, I would have a question. I think you said something very interesting at the end of the quick summary. You said that it was really important to have fun and you know, like to keep the joy and the fun in coming to work every day and doing the work that we do. As an entrepreneur, I think that sometimes some of the days are very tough, and we can be discouraged and feel like crying in the shower and everything. Do you have any advice, any tips on how to continue to nurture this happiness and this joy and this fun when we are working?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, firstly, I think having fun means in some ways often also not taking yourself too seriously, right? In some ways. So the way I kind of do that is I'm trying not to be too, you know, I want to have fun. So I want to basically not be too serious on a lot of the things that normally companies are serious about. So I think in terms of, you know, in my companies, in terms of what time you turn up to work or what you wear, that kind of stuff doesn't really matter, right? And then be kind of more serious on the results side of things. In terms of those days when, you know, it's just really tough or things go wrong, I think also looking at the kind of bigger picture, if you look back maybe, you know, 3 or 5 years in your own life and you look back and see what you were worrying about back then, I bet it's very different to what you're worrying about right now. And if you look at that, it may seem quite trivial, right? Oh, I can't believe I used to worry about doing this kind of small thing. Now I can do that in half an hour, right? And it would never stress me out. So I think keeping that in mind. A nice kind of mental thing I like to do as well is to look at the worst case scenario and think through it really, really deeply, right? Because I think you also need a slight bit of paranoia as a startup founder, because you kind of got to plan a little bit ahead as well, right? And then when I do that exercise and I look, okay, well, what's the worst case scenario if everything were to go wrong at the same time? And then when I switch back and look at how my day or how my week has gone, I realize that actually it's not that bad in comparison, right? It could be a lot worse. So that's in some ways a kind of reassuring thought. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And then I wanted to ask Zainab, Sandas, do you have any particular question that you wanted to ask?
I actually have a comment, because prioritization is it's such a huge task when you're dealing with one company. So listening to Emanuele and his pointers, and knowing that he's looking after 3 portfolios, 3 companies, and it's working out for him. So this sort of gives me the confidence that if I am to apply all of these steps to and incorporate them in my workflow and in my process, it's definitely going to work. I'm just thinking that the amount of work that a person has to look at and manage.
Sorry, Sundas, you're cutting out a bit. I can't hear you.
We cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now? Well, mine is just a comment. I'm just commenting on that. Listening to Manny's tips sort of make me feel confident in applying it in my work processes, because I know he's looking after 3 companies, and if it's working out for him, it would definitely be easy and workable for people for starting up and starting. You might have 1 or 2 businesses to look after. So just a comment that makes me feel at ease and gives me a bit of sort of confidence in these processes.
Got it. Yeah, I think that also links to one question from Sinaf in the chat about am I managing all 3 companies directly, or do I have another person to manage and report to you? So yeah, for Mad and Blue, yeah, I do manage the companies directly. So I'm the CEO of those 2 companies. For Sound School, the music school, so actually that's my brother that runs that company, and I just assist him where required, mostly on things like strategy or budgeting or any of those kind of points, right? But the day-to-day running is more on his side.
Thank you very much. Zainab, do you have any question or any comment you wanted to jump in?
Yes, this was a very, very informative and very engaging workshop. So I would like to thank you for that. Also, I have babies around me, so I apologize for any background noise if there is while I speak. But I would just really like to thank you for the workshop. It was very good, and a lot of key pointers for me as well, because I have a very hard time managing my tasks and prioritizing. So really, really grateful for this.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Yeah. Yeah, and I guess from
would Deja have any question? Sorry.
Hold on.
I'm not sure if Ute can hear me. Yes, she's here.
A good sign that the information was received well is when people don't have any questions, because it has been covered already and answered. So that's probably what it reflects about. But like Zainab said, this was extremely helpful for everybody, because everyone's doing something, and it's never one task work. a list of things that you have to do and prioritize. And often, you know, when you're working on things, you see that in the beginning something might seem a priority, but as you move along, it sort of it becomes clear that probably this is not something that you should have focused on from the beginning. So it sort of helps to reset and reprioritize things, and it's easier to do all of this if you know how to do it, if you know sort of like a process to reset and reprioritize. So I think this was helpful for everybody.
Thank you. Sumbal, you've raised your hand. Did you have a question?
Yeah, my question is that this is a very difficult time for everyone at the moment. Having the curfew and lockdown situation prevalent in many countries still. I'm in Sri Lanka at the moment. And I just wanted to know that considering so many layoffs from jobs from like it's happening all around in the world, so many people are being laid off from work, and their pays are being cut into half, cut down, and it's a very depressing situation. So in this time, do you think that being an entrepreneur and starting your own business is like as easy as it was before? And if not, then what can we do to actually like raise our morale a little bit and just be focused on starting our own startup? Like I just need some motivation, because I'm like not even getting into it, not even starting anything, because I'm like just very down because of the situation. So I just wanted some pointers on that.
I mean, I think especially where we are at now with the global economy and with COVID-19, I think the uncertainty is nobody knows what's going to happen next, right? But I think if we look back, say, to the previous recession, so 2008, 2009, we actually see that there's been a huge number of startups were born during that time, right? And I think the reason for that is that people were either, were laid off, right? Huge layoffs happened. And so people, out of necessity, that they had the time to think, and then they also had the motivation to start earning some money, right? Because obviously everybody, needs to live, right? And so we saw a huge number of startups start during that time that now, 12 years later, are huge global companies. Off the top of my head, I can think of Airbnb, was started during a recession, and also Stripe, the global payments company. So, this kind of stuff does well. In terms of motivation in these times, I mean, I think there's also the factor that, if you're locked in, right, in town, and you don't know how long it's going to last. I mean, in parts, you've also got to see the limitations, right? There's always some limits, wherever it's to do with COVID-19 or legal structures or your own skill sets or where you are in the world, that kind of side of things. But I think having that long-term perspective where, this crisis is not going to be a 20-year crisis, right? So if you look at it from that point of view, I think the best time to start is always today, right? It's never tomorrow or in a year from now. And I think there's a similar kind of Chinese proverb that the best time to plant a tree was sort of 30 years ago. The second best time is today, right? But more specifically in terms of what can one actually do right now, especially if you're locked in? I mean, obviously, stuff online is booming. So I think something around that kind of area maybe it's quite interesting, and also it's shown that maybe in the future, if there's another crisis in 10 years or 15 years from now, those kind of businesses will be a bit more resilient as well. But yeah, so I hope that kind of answers your question a bit.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Hello. Hello.
Hi there.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, sure.
Oh, okay, okay. So I think I heard you mention about like rather than focusing on the time or anything, you better focus on getting the task done. So like how to make sure that your staff really get the work done at the end of the day with all the freedom you have given to them.
Right. Yeah. That's not easy. I think it starts with hiring the right people who flourish in that kind of environment. And I think I've also struggled with that. I always wanted my companies to have this kind of high freedom environment, but then it requires to be balanced with a lot of personal responsibility, right? So that's one thing. So it starts with getting the right people on board. And I think one of the most common causes for me having to let go of an employee is that they've consistently not understood that balance and abused that kind of system, right? Over the years, I think I've gotten a bit better at managing this kind of high freedom environment. And I think the way to do that is to set very clear expectations of what you need done and by when, right? So with that, and then you don't really care if somebody's in the office or they're not, or what day they're working, right? So you just really look and focus on the results, that sort of things. To make that easier, I mean, we use, I'll kind of plug my own software system here. We use our project management system, Blue, to actually manage every project at MAD, but also building Blue itself, right? And the beauty about that is that, I can assign a task to somebody and I can set a due date, obviously normally discussing that with them. And I have a clear audit trail of when that task was created, when that person was assigned, and that kind of stuff, right? So that makes it much, much easier to make sure that people are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Yes, thank you so much.
So we have some questions in the chat. So first, there is a question from Sotievi. She's asking, for the first time to start up, how to stay motivated and to commit to the business.
Okay, great question. I would say don't compare yourself to others. I think that's quite important because it's easy to start something small and then look at the bigger companies that are doing maybe something similar and go, oh, there's no way we will be like them in the future, right? So I think that's important. And I think the other thing is to celebrate small wins and celebrate them well, right? And make them important, because I think what is good is that, sometimes the things when you're small, the wins are, you might win a small contract, right? If you're some kind of professional service firm, and that might seem in the grand scheme of things very irrelevant, right? But if you look at it, again, you kind of zoom out and look at it in the long term, that may have grown your revenue by 10%, right? And actually that's awesome, right? The CEO of Apple would love to grow revenue 10%, so I think there's that. So you look at it, you kind of shift the way you look at things on that side of things. And I think also, as you get into that, also be a bit pre-prepared that things will inevitably go wrong, and you might take so you don't get a shock when you start and you realize, oh wow, this is a lot of work, right? This is difficult. You make that conscious decision before you actually decide to start. I see another question about, so to be the leader of a startup, do we need to have a good financing background?
That's a very good question, actually.
That's a fantastic question because, well, I'll be quite straight up. So the MAD first year revenue was, I think, around $800,000, and we managed to lose more than $100,000 that year. And that was completely my fault because I had no idea about proper financial controlling, about profit and loss statements, cash flow. So, I just started and it grew, and I paid a price for that, right? So I think for that, yeah, I would say you don't have to have a good financing background to start with, but I would say, you know, put that learning hat on and get that done. Learn that, you know, learn the basics of finance. And I think for that, I think the most important thing to know about finance for startups, it's tracking cash flow, because there's only really, the main reason why companies, you know, stop or fail is because they just simply run out of cash. They just haven't got any money to pay employees or do anything else, right? So I think being slightly obsessed with how much you have in the bank, how many months it will be until that money runs out, and what you need to do to make sure that doesn't happen, wherever it's making more sales or bringing in more investors on board. I've actually written an entire article on this on our blog, so I will also share that because it goes into a lot more detail with some kind of practical examples. But yeah, I would say in a nutshell, just make sure you're good at tracking kind of free cash flow.
Yeah, and also to elaborate more on this, I think that many entrepreneurs do not have any financial, you know, like knowledge, and are not financially savvy, and they do not necessarily come from a core business background either. Then the key is to be supported by the proper team members who know what they are doing. You remember we had this session about how to start a business when it comes to the compliance part, and we mentioned about the taxes and everything, that sometimes we don't know anything about the compliance in regards to the administration, the taxes and the ministries, but then it was very important to rely on companies and partners who are really savvy in this area. So I would say it's the same also when it comes to finance. Even if as an entrepreneur you do not understand 100% about your financial implications, then having a CFO or at least a chief accountant who is really savvy and who can really guide you and support you in this area is extremely important.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think also on that note, I think the advantage of starting small as well is that you've got time to kind of gain some of that knowledge as well, and you've got time to find the right partners. If you try to get big immediately, then I think often you'll run into these kind of major problems, like I did, you know, and then pay the price for that. So I think, yeah, for sure, I think starting small and bringing additional people on board.
Yeah, and just to add to this, any successful startup, I think the core of it is how well-rounded the team is, because like Ejin said, we can't do everything ourselves. We can't be experts in everything. So to bring people on to make a team which sort of complements expertise and sort of complements the gaps that there are in your own expertise. That really makes a huge difference. So.
Yeah, that is true. The problem I've faced before is, how do you hire somebody that's good at doing something where you're not an expert at, right? Because how do you evaluate them correctly, right? And that's there's no easy answer to that. You know, if you want to hire, you know, an accountant and you don't have a finance background, how do you make sure they know what they're saying? If you want to hire an engineer, you know, like a developer, you know, if you're building software and you're not a software developer, how do you hire the right ones to start with, right? Once you have enough of a team, that's maybe easier, but yeah, the way I did it was through like trial and error, right? And of course, there's a lot of problems that causes. Yeah.
And also what you said earlier, wearing many hats. A CEO or a founder of a company has to wear many hats and has to do a bit of learning. And if you're doing that, you know, it sort of gets you on the right track of evaluating whether somebody has the skill set you need for your company.
because you've done your little bit of research or reading up or understanding of things?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think the more hands-on you can be at the start, the better, for sure. I think there's on that side of things.
So I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm receiving several messages of people who say they have to leave. So I was thinking maybe we could conclude or share a few conclusion words. So first of all, Manny, we really wanted to thank you for joining us today. It was a really fun, really engaging presentation, and I learned a lot of things. So I hope everyone else did also. And thank you, Manny, for joining also today. It was really great to have the both of you. Sorry, I just see we have a question from Wani Ratana. She's asking what are the different components that make a successful marketing strategy?
Okay, good question. All right, so I think
you have 1 hour more to.
Maybe Adrian, do you want to answer this thing? But no, I mean, I think I'll give my 2 cents, and then I think Adrian is the specialist here. Yeah, from my point of view, I would say it's knowing your target audience really, really well, because I think one mistake that some people make is trying to market to everyone, right? And it's too noisy nowadays to be able to do that. Nobody will see you. So yeah, having a very clearly defined target audience, and then testing the messaging, right? Because any product or any service, there's lots of different ways to sell it, right? And so you got to find what message works well for a particular target audience, and for different target audiences, different messages will work. So for instance, if I am maybe selling to a bank, then some of the core messaging I might push is about the trust that our customers have in us, the fact that I've worked for other financial institutions and that side of things, and the fact that I know how to work with them in their way, right? But that kind of messaging wouldn't work well if I'm trying to sell to a startup, because they're all going to want to hear is, oh, speed, right? How quickly can we move forwards, and that kind of thing. So I think, yeah, I say knowing who you're targeting and testing your messaging before actually deploying your marketing strategy. Maybe Adrian, you've got kind of more granular answer as well there.
Oh, sure. Well, first, I completely agree with everything you just said, definitely. And I think to put it in a nutshell and to be very concise in my answer, I would say that focusing on the logical framework of the objectives, the expected results, and the performance indicators is very important. I think successful marketing strategy is not necessarily a strategy that pays off right away, but that is a strategy that means something and that gives you answers. So when you focus on your objectives and every dollar that you invest, you expect a return, and not necessarily in terms of money, but at least in terms of indicators of performance, then that's how you put one step after another, and you know where you are going, and always being very agile in your approach and being ready to readapt your strategy if you see that your KPIs are not met and your objectives are not served the way they were supposed to be. So really being structured in your approach and doing things in a very structured and agile way, I would say. All right, ladies and maybe not ladies. If you don't have any further question, we will end the meeting now. As usual, we will share everything in the group. So thank you very much, Zainab and Sandas, as usual, for those sessions, for organizing those sessions together. It's always a great pleasure. Thank you, Vute, for joining us today again. And thank you again to our speakers and to every one of you who stayed until the end. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, and if you have any specific questions to the speakers, definitely you can reach out to us and we will share the contact with you.
One point, as I mentioned yesterday to you, Adrian. So I think for anyone that joined this webinar, on if you do have a startup and you want to use Blue to help you manage all your things, we will be happy to offer that free of charge for a year, which normally would be, you know, $500 or $600. So I think, Adrienne, if anyone's interested later, maybe you can collect the details and then.
Oh, I'm sure there will be, because when we had our session on the tools and tips and business advice on COVID-19, we talked about some of the tools that we recommended, and Blue was part of this list. So definitely, I'm sure that many people would be interested in testing and seeing how this could apply to their businesses. So we will definitely share spread the word, and we will let you know if there is any request for this. Thank you very much. It's very generous.
Of course. All right.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. And I will end the meeting now, and feel free to reach out to us. And Sanda, Zainab, we will continue speaking on WhatsApp, and Manny, I will reach out to you also after.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you again, everyone. Have a very nice day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.